Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another fantastic episode. Well, I guess this will be a Kids from It podcast episode. I hadn't really thought about that. I'll split it on my main channel and our Kids from It show. I am joined today by two fantastic individuals, Heather and Trevor. Both of them were classmates of mine back at Maranatha Baptist Academy. From what years? Heather and I went there from like 92 or 93 to 99 and 2000. And Trevor, I'm guessing you were like, 95 to 99 or something like that? Something, or maybe 96. It was, yeah. So like, I think
Something like that. I think I came in maybe a little later, but like I was playing basketball with you guys as a homeschooler, and then I came. Anyway, but we've known each other at least since then.
We all go way back. And so I've talked to both of them individually, and we're like, hey, let's get the band back together and talk about the great times and experience we had, not only at our Christian school, which was a Christian fundamentalist school. It was as radical as most of them get. I've seen worse. Believe it or not, I mean, I have seen worse that I've talked to people. And it's just the journey that we've gone on together and separately, and where we ended up. And I was trying to remember, so where we are all coming from here, because we have all left Christian. This is always fascinating to me. We've all left Christian fundamentalism, but everyone ends up in a different location, like as far as their belief system or their philosophy. And we'll get into that later on here. And so I wanted to just put our positions on the table right away. So I am an atheist. I don't believe in a deity or supernatural. Of course, one could be real. I don't know. But I just I haven't seen any convincing evidence of it one way or the other. And Heather, where were you coming from with this?
So kind of how I mentioned this towards the end of the last podcast that you and I did together, and that is, it's hard for me to define where I am right now.
Yeah.
I have rejected the specific Christianity, the kind of Christianity that I was raised with, in terms of the fundamentalism. And I have become very open to other belief systems. I'm still on that journey.
Yeah.
Of trying to figure out.
Yeah.
I do believe there's a higher power. It might not be some, that might be just the earth.
Yeah.
The life that the earth gives us and things like that. I'm kind of in that. Still a little bit of a crux.
Yeah. It's, in my experience, it never ends. So you're always searching on exactly where you're going. Then Trevor, where are you coming from?
Yeah, thanks. I guess it's probably easiest to just describe myself as an atheist now, like you, TJ. I still kind of think of myself as what I might call like a cultural Christian, and that like the Christian myth, the story, it's sort of like where I'm coming from in life, right? Like it's all the stories I know, right? It's what I grew up with. It's the world I live in, and it's what I'm interested in. If I'm going to read something, I'm not going to read other religions so much. It's going to be about Christianity. So it's definitely like a big part of my life in that sense. But I no longer like believe in an actual God, in any way, in any sort of way like we did in high school, right?
Yeah, it's the cultural Christianity thing is kind of inescapable. Again, because those are the waters you swim in.
Your life.
Yeah, there's no getting around it, honestly. And so it is interesting to try what you said about how if you're going to read something, that interests you, or that you say it's going to be, at least Christian adjacent. And I remember thinking about this whenever I would hear people, because I'm sure both of you can relate to this, that when we were younger, when I was younger, I really enjoyed debating the merits of my faith and telling people why what I believe was true and why what I believe most aligned with, or better aligned with, the teachings of Christ than theirs. And what I began to realize that people would argue that, well, if you study Christianity and if you're a Muslim or a Hindu, Zoroastrian, whatever, if you study Christianity, you will realize that ours is correct. And I would think, well, how much have you studied about Zoroastrianism? How many hours? You've put in countless hours into studying the 66 books of the Bible, and you still say, well, there's so much more for me to learn. And like, what does that compare to what you know about everything else? How can you be so confident that the one you've happened to bank all of your time in is the one that happens to be correct? I always found that to be interesting, because as much as you study that stuff, you don't really know about that anywhere. Yeah, even just culturally, like just growing up knowing the stories of David and Goliath or Cain and Abel, just like base level stuff that you probably couldn't name from the holy books of other faiths.
Yeah, I love that, TJ. And I think where some people are coming from with that like argument is they're not the ones who have done the work, but they trust these other figures in their life, right? There are these trusted advisors, trusted theologians that they rely on for these arguments, and I think that's where people are coming from. And as long as they have someone out there that has done the work, or they think has done the work, then they're willing to take on that belief, right? I think that's that's true of many ideas out there, I would think.
No, that's I completely agree with that.
All right. So this is I wrote down a couple questions that are probably gonna be curveballs, but you guys gonna be ready for them, I'm sure. This is going to we talked about this both times that I spoke with you folks, but election's coming up. Donald Trump. I want to get out of the way. I just want to get it out of the way real quick. I have to do it. I got to do it. But I don't know if I mentioned it to you guys that a lot of times you'll hear people that are amazed that. So I think when Trump ran in 2016, he got 81% of the white evangelical vote. And like back then, you would still have people saying, oh, well, sure, he's a bad guy, but, I'm going to reluctantly support him. 81% is not reluctant support. That is enthusiastic support. They voted for Trump in higher numbers than they did for Romney, for McCain, or George W. Bush. Like it's the highest numbers ever. So they couldn't wait to vote for Donald Trump. But as time went on, they've become less apologetic about it. Like the ones that have not. I have seen people where Trump was the final straw. I have seen plenty of people like that. Not nearly enough, but I have seen people like that. And those who are still around, they weren't tricked in supporting Trump. They like who he is because he is who they are. That's what it comes down to. Like, yeah, they don't have like the wealth or the connections or even the charisma that Donald Trump happens to possess, but they like the bullying and they like the pettiness and the regressive values. And it's just I'm not interested in pretending that's not the case. Like it's been plenty of time. I can kind of see that someone who was in 2015, 2016 was like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. But now, if you still support Trump, I kind of think you're a lost cause. I'll start with Trevor first, because I think we discussed this in more depth than ours. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on people our family and the evangelical church enthusiastically supporting Trump? Yeah, it's wild to me. This was the first election. What was it, 2016? I had family members wearing MAGA hats to Thanksgiving. They were, so much excitement for who this person was. And it honestly, it is. I was definitely not conservative at that time, and maybe only marginally religious at that time. But it was like, wow, this is definitely repulsive in a lot of ways, right? To see who this guy is, and then to see my community come out in support of him so enthusiastically was kind of the last straw for me. Is like, okay, this community is definitely not my community, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
It was sickening. That 2016 was the first major election that I didn't vote. I didn't vote for the president. I didn't know, because I'm just like, I can't choose. Thankfully, I can only speak for my brother. He is not an avid Trump supporter.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear that.
And I don't know which way he's going to vote.
Mhm.
If he votes for Trump, it's because he believes that, and he and I have talked about this, that Trump did do some good things for our economy. However, so many other things. So yeah, I didn't really run into, seeing people in my life because, gosh, you guys got to understand that so many people from my past have absolutely just like rejected me ever since I came out. So my family is my found family, my new family, and definitely not Trump supporter. So, anyways.
Yeah, it's honestly it's for the best in that sense that I mean it's like Trevor. So I've been actually fortunate that so my family doesn't support Trump at all. None of them they've despised him since day one. None of them are still in the same cult that we grew up in. So that was a lot less likely to be the case. But I do have friends that I knew who did vote for Donald Trump, and the only ones that I had any patience for at all were the ones who shut the fuck up about it. Honestly, if you were out there and you were happy and like you were like you said, like with your brother, Heather, that if I try to think that if I were still conservative in 2016, even if I believed everything, like I backed all the policies that Trump backed, I would never publicly state that I voted for him. I would be so embarrassed and ashamed that I would never let anybody know. And like those people can get that, but the people are like, "Oh yeah, this is great. This is fantastic." And look, we were around. We remember when Bill Clinton's impeachment happened and how often they talked about, well, it's really important that sexual purity be represented in the highest office in the land. Turned out they didn't care about it whatsoever. They didn't care about any of it. And so, yeah, it's just been, I've been kind of fortunate that those people have kind of removed themselves in a lot of ways. And you don't really get to see that happening. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how the election's going to go. Nobody does. But honestly, the fact that it's still an open question on whether Donald Trump could be reelected is a staggering indictment on this nation. Go ahead, Heather. Oh, did she freeze on us? Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh, go ahead.
I think you're back, Heather. I think we're
good.
There you go. Oh well, I keep speaking too soon. There you go.
Try it now.
All right. Hello.
You're good.
Yeah,
you're good.
Good. Sorry about that.
What were you saying?
We've been having trouble with our internet here, so I don't know. No, I was just agreeing with you. It's scary. It's scary to think that we've come this close, and he's again one of the choices.
What are you gonna say, Trevor?
No, I wasn't gonna say anything in particular other than just Heather, with you saying that. I really hope that it's over after this election.
I know.
I'm so ready to move
on. I know.
He's also just so old. He's struggling so hard to keep up, and just like let's just move on.
Yeah, he's looked really bad the last week or so. I mean, which is saying a lot for Donald Trump or whatever. But all right, so first question I wanted to ask, and we'll start with Heather here. Looking back on our experience, it's really easy to focus on the negatives because, brother, there were a ton of them. But what I like to think of the positive ones too. That like the lessons you learned or the skills you acquired that you may or may not have over time that's happened. And I mean, I try to think of like the positive characteristics. Like I know that there's like this toxic relationship between your identity as a worker and trying to appease your boss and like the supplication that's involved there. There's a lot of bad elements to that, but that along with my family experience, it did teach the value of hard work and saying that take pride in yourself, always try to be the best worker in the group. And once again, I know it's kind of flawed because this is the problem with a lot of conservative advice, that they'll say, well, listen, if you want to succeed in life, here's what you have to do. You need to be the best person there. You need to work as hard as you can. You need to show up on time, early if you have to. And then when people see how competent and how dedicated you are, you're going to be rewarded. The problem is that if everybody does that, it still only works for one person, right? It can't work for everybody. Like eventually, you're going to have one position available, 10 people try out for it. If all 10 of them are all-star employees, doesn't matter. There's not 10 extra positions for you. So, you can't make all these solutions can't be so individualistic, because it ignores the externalities and the factors involved with actually solving the problem. But it's still a good value to try to, be a decent employee or worker or comrade or anything like that. But any good ones that you picked up along the way, Heather, that you can think back of from your Maranatha days?
So I can't associate any good thing with Maranatha. Sorry.
I was there, Heather.
What about us?
Let's associate us.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Except for Trevor. Trevor was amazing.
I remember physics class. I loved our physics class.
I was just about to say that.
We were the whole time.
He and I were so competitive. I loved that. I absolutely loved that. I carried that, so I became a teacher. And I taught physics and chemistry. And you remember how I struggled in chemistry quite a bit?
A bit, yeah. I mean, not so much. I really love physics, but yeah.
Yeah. So I would always refer back to it, especially to my physics students. I was just like, man, the guy that I graduated with, yes, there were only 2 of us. But Mr. Tipton had to round our average to the nearest, I want to say 100th, if not 1,000th, because we were so close in the tie.
Damn.
And those were fun times. Going back to what you were at, guess what? When I think back on the good lessons that I've learned in life, I attribute them to my parents, especially my mom. And that is a good work ethic. Be you. Be the best you that you can be. Of course.
Oh,
shoot! It looks like
in the culture that we lived in, it was all about. Still just blacked out. Okay. It was all about self-sacrifice. It's joy is Jesus, others you. And granted, I embraced that, but it wasn't till years later, like in my adult life, because my journey has been night and quick, and you and I talked about that last time. It's been a very slow figuring things out on my own. A lot of it had to do with, I lost my parents early in life. Just really having to figure some things out on my own. But coming to a realization now to where it's just like, okay, sacrificing yourself to a fault is so toxic. It's so toxic. But as far as the good things, I would say like people, tell me at work and everything, Heather, you're such a kind person, and you're very self-sacrificing and giving. Of course, I've reached a more healthy balance in that, and they also tell me how real I am. But again, I attribute that to my parents. I don't attribute that to Maranatha, to what I learned in Maranatha. If anything, when I think back on things that I learned from Maranatha, and yes, I guess it is thinking more on the negative stuff. It's more of the cautionary tale kind of things. Like, okay, I was questioning that at that time, though I didn't know why I was questioning it. I just knew that it didn't seem right. And it's now later in life, midlife, in the past 10 years or so, that I've been able to come to my realizations and think back and be like, man, I had an issue with that teaching since I was little. Like, I remember hearing those things in the sermon, like the whole that it's men, women, never the twain shall meet in submission. It's like, that doesn't seem right. that doesn't even seem to me what Christ is teaching here. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that's all right. That's good. That's good. Trevor?
Yeah. So the question, like, what are some maybe some good things that we could pull out of our experience at Maranatha? I guess a couple things come to mind to me, and this is part of just how the world has changed in the past 20 years. But just to have a community of people that is like interested in bigger things beyond just ourselves, I think does have value, and does maybe would have value even more so today, with kind of how disconnected in general sort of we are. So like coming to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, seeing you guys every day at school, we were all pretty tight. And despite like all the negatives that I agree with, right, and the sort of cultish abuses, and just simply bad ideas, destructive ideas, right? There is something about that sort of community of people gathering together it's a little hard to replicate outside um, of a religious community like that. The closest thing I feel like I have right now is I've joined a climbing group, and it's great. It's a place to chill and hang out with people. Um, I was part of like a whiskey night group, so like we find ways. But I do think there's a lot of value in sort of that, the gathering of people with sort of a higher purpose and some at some level. The other thing I think that was of value is sort of this emphasis in like a uh, thinking about like a framework for we had like a theology, right? Like it was a horrible theology, but we had like this sort of framework for understanding the world, and I think that kind of taught me a way of thinking, like a worldview, a way of reasoning that actually took me out of Christianity, but is still kind of useful, right, and helpful in my life. So those are two things that come to mind. I'm sure I could come up with others. But.
Yeah, agree on all counts from what you guys said.
Same.
Yeah.
I have to say the community one is something that definitely feel like you said it's very difficult to replicate that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I really miss that. The whole medieval
and it cuts
thing.
both ways, right, Heather? Like
Yeah.
it can be a community that rejects you and a community that you find, both and.
Yeah. No, and we all need to be needed at a certain level to be able to find purpose. And so other you need, and also feeling needed by those other people. And that the intellectual discussions about faith and any aspect of life is very important. And that's why I was actually going to mention, because TJ and I were talking before you joined, Trevor, that my wife and I are part of this medieval reenactment group. It's actually worldwide. It's not Renaissance, it's bigger than that. But on one hand, there are aspects as far as like, I don't know, I think that when you get a big group of people together for anything, you're going to have some of the really crappy things that we saw like in the church community. Because there are some aspects where I'm just like, man, this is ringing a little too close to what I left.
Right.
And I can struggle with that. But at the same time, it also, the upsides is it's that community. It's that community of like minds, and yet a lot of variety. And you got support, you got love, you've got rejection, you got hurt. I mean, it just kind of comes in that package. But yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, like the sense of purpose, that's like one thing that I miss the most. Well, what I say is what I miss the most is the fact that I knew all the answers. That was great. That was fantastic. Yeah, it's like when you've got everything figured out, and yeah, sure, there might be things on the margins you aren't sure of, but on the important questions, you have the answers, you know they're right, and that's gone. It's gone. And that is uncertainty is one of the worst feelings in the human experience. It's like a conspiracy theory is better than no theory at all for a lot of people. They will reach for a BS answer instead of someone with no answer. And that I do miss, but it's also fun to, try to find it. But then, the sense of purpose that's involved there, that we all knew that we were essentially living in a Star Wars movie, that we were all selected by God to be his messengers on Earth and to carry out his mission. And he was going to reward us when we were done. We had the rule book. We had the map for all this. And, it's funny that in this faith that you're taught to be incredibly humble, but breathtakingly arrogant at the same time. That, little old me, the servant of Almighty God, okay, what's going on here? I know, right? And so it's just funny, that contradiction, that the dissonance that plays there. But also, what you guys mentioned, now this is hard to say, because I don't know if I or we would have been like this anyway, if this is just a product of who we are as people, and the environment plays a part too. But the intellectual inquiry, I got to say, I did learn a lot of that, because I have a lot of these conversations with folks who, believe it or not, had worse environments than us, and ours was really bad. Ours is among the it's worse than most, but there are some that are even more oppressive. And one thing that I always said is that I never liked how a lot of the our teachers or clergymen or whatever, the condescension that they would use towards the kids all the time. It's just the weird power and satisfaction they felt that all these 13-year-olds were scared of them. It's very odd how much they got off on that. But it's really disturbing. And one thing I will say, though, is they always told us to look for answers, from what I can remember. They never said, hey, just take my word for it. They're like, nope, it's in there. Look it up. Here's where you can find it, and check the answer yourself. And to an extent, they didn't even mind if you questioned it, because I would ask. I was like, okay, well, how do we know this is true? And where can we find this? The problem was, if you didn't accept their answer, that's when it got bad. If they didn't accept their answer, they got really uncomfortable with that. But the initial question, at least, they didn't mind, which is more than I can say for a lot of places like this. And I did appreciate, I was kind of surprised at Bible college how little a lot of people had looked into the Bible. And all these kids have gone to Christian schools too, and most of them just didn't seem to give a fuck. They just didn't. They're like, oh yeah, that's what's in there. And I was like, well, why do you believe that? How do you know? And this actually what bothers me now more than anything is that whenever I talk to people who are still fundamentalist believers, a lot less these days than in the past, but they will just vehemently defend this position, and it falls apart after 2 or 3 questions, and act like I'm the asshole. I was like, oh, hold on, this is your belief. Why are you getting mad at me about this? And that's just I don't know if that was a product of where we were raised, but I did appreciate the environment a little bit. And holy crap, you guys, the community. I cannot echo this sentiment strongly enough, in that, as far as I've seen, church or a religious gathering is the best assembling of human community I can think of. It's hard. I haven't seen anything that comes close to the camaraderie that you can feel on a consistent basis for the rest of your life, because it's not just like with the cult thing. It's not just the strong man up there teaching you, the prophet from the Lord. It's way more than that. It's down to where are we going to have weddings and funerals? It's just stuff like that, like a common bond that brings everybody together. It's very difficult. And we try to find other places that you can build community. But it does make sense. So you ever see studies where it talks about how religious people are happier than non-religious people? Well, of course they are. Of course they are. They're specially chosen by a triune deity who spoke reality into existence. Yeah, of course you're going to feel pretty good about that. And all of you meet with all your friends every week, and you guys as kids play sports together. You have potlucks every month and everything. It's a great community experience. It's just so awful that it's so toxic in a lot of ways. I have a hard time imagining like a non-Christian version of that. That you can do it that'll have the same power. So I agree with everything you guys said there. Anything you want to add to that?
I was just thinking it's like the ultimate support system.
Yes.
Yeah. Even with the toxicity. So yeah, go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's I'm kind of sort of trying to replicate it in different ways, and it's it's hard. I don't know if it's really possible.
Yeah.
Something though you reminded me of is the intellectual curiosity that has developed in us, and I was sort of giving that to Maranatha a bit. But wait, actually maybe I shouldn't, right? Because like we were getting together. Remember, like you and I and Matt would get together at
Right.
the Waffle House and
Yep.
have these conversations and question things, and that actually felt like the seed for
It was
intellectual
for me.
curiosity
Yeah.
later, throughout my life. I guess we were reacting to Maranatha, of course, but I don't know. Anyway, I just was reminded of that. I don't want to give them too much credit.
You're right, yeah, because it continued beyond Maranatha, and the rug was there. It's just that it wasn't unique to them, and so it may have just been us, but it wasn't. I just see it stifled a lot, and I guess they did try that too. I remember Mr. Tipton making really snide comments about our Bible studies in the morning. He'd be like,
"Oh yeah,
what are you guys doing over there?" I'm like, well, what do you care? we're studying the Bible. What are you mad about? And I was thinking too about Heather, something you mentioned about the community aspect and the support system. And it's funny with the toxic part of that, because I always think about this, that I hope this doesn't happen, but I would bet even odds that it will. That, most likely, like whenever I'm old and it's my time to pass away, I'm going to be laying on my deathbed and someone's going to come up to me and be like, hey, TJ, isn't it about time you accept God? And I say, okay, well, just let me fucking die in peace, all right? Because this and they see it like they're doing me some sort of, it's like as rude as you could possibly be. Like they're gonna get this jab on the way out. Because think about if the opposite happened. Like if some Christian was dying and I went up to him and was like, hey man, it's about time to admit I was right this entire time before you check out. You got one last opportunity. And it's like they don't see it as rude, but I know that's going to happen. And I don't know. That the support system part is fantastic, but once again, it can be weaponized for awful means as well.
100%.
Yeah, right. And so, all right. So this is one of the questions Trevor asked. So we'll start with you, man. What are your thoughts on objective versus subjective morality? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is something I have kind of revisited recently because I feel like it's something that came up a lot as in Bible school time period. I didn't go to Bible school, but like with conversations with the religious folks in my life, it was like part of the reason you want to believe in God is so you have like this objective standard, right, for morality. And as I think more about like, okay, as a non-Christian, what is my objective standard for morality? And I don't know. I find it to be a more interesting question now, coming at it not from a Christian perspective. And I guess kind of where my brain is on that is I think that we all sort of have these moral intuitions. A moral intuition that killing, that murder is wrong, for example. And those intuitions are shared among humanity generally. And so it's a subjective intuition. In that sense, it's like subjective. But because it's all shared, like it's objective in that sense. We are all commonly sharing this sort of objective intuition, moral to morality. And so I don't know if it's best to say is morality subjective or objective, but I definitely think you don't need God to have to be able to observe our own moral intuitions and realize that we share them as humanity and we can stand up for them as individuals and as part of a community. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with that.
What are your thoughts on it, Heather?
So yeah, I kind of discussed a lot of these points with my wife last night, and she goes, subjective morality, what is he talking about? And so I told her, I said, well,
was a big deal. Yeah.
We forget how big of nerds we actually were.
Yeah.
About this shit. Yeah. Like who talks about this? Yeah.
When the way we were raised is that truth. So kind of setting morality to the side here for a second. Truth is absolute. It can't be relative, or it's not truth. And I explained to her, you know, like, okay, here's what we hold to now versus that could not possibly exist is the way we were raised to believe. If it's relative truth, it's not truth. That goes against the whole very nature of what truth is. So, kind of in that vein of light, there's only one standard of morality, and it's God's standard. And so, therefore, that cannot be subjective. And she was blown away. And she grew up in a Christian community, not independent fundamental Baptist, or as she's laying next to me.
Yeah, I was
She
like,
said, not did you hear that?
Yeah, I was like, oh, she's in the room.
not the whole there's a black and there's a white, you know, and there's no gray, not black and white bullshit is what she said. So yeah, she was not raised with IFB, and she thought, she'll mention this to me often, that she thought she was raised in a strict Christian environment. But the more that comes out of how I was raised, it just blows her away. She's just like, I just can't imagine, you know, that kind of thing. So, I'm atheist. Yeah, my wife is an atheist, by the way. So.
What do you think, TJ?
Okay, so
what are you thinking?
All right, I guess bottom line, I don't believe there is objective reality. I don't think there can be, honestly. Like by objective, by like hard, you know, like rock solid objective, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But Heather, you mentioned absolute truth. You got to remember to capitalize the T in truth. They love to do that. Like, this is absolute truth. Like, they like truth. Like, it's like. Yeah, truth is the fourth person of the Godhead. It's this truth right there. It's a proper noun. But they would talk about this a lot, and they would always, God, I hated, one thing I couldn't stand were the fucking overused aphorisms and folksy shit they would say in sermons, even when I was all in on this. And one of them was, oh, so you meet someone who says they don't believe in absolute truth, ask them, or as someone who says that there is no absolute truth, like, oh, is that absolutely true? Like it's some sort of slam dunk. Yes. Like no one has thought about this.
Like, there.
Oh, got him. Got his ass. It's like, oh, come on. Really? It's
okay.
Just, these, I swear, those preacher stories. I mean, I have so many cataloged in my brain. There was one, I don't know if I told either of you about this. This is when I was at Tabernacle. But Pastor Hightower at Tabernacle would always tell this story. He'd tell it every Sunday night, I feel like. He would say that he knew a guy who was an agnostic, right? And he said that he asked the agnostic, oh, hey, do you know what agnostic comes from? Like, where the word comes from? He says, well, no. He says, well, agnostic is like, it comes from the Greek, like the letter A, which is like without or like nothing or something. And then the word gnosis, which means knowledge. So what you're saying is you don't know anything. And the agnostic said, oh, how about that? At 13 years old, that's a bullshit story. That did not happen. There's no way that if it did, it didn't convince him. Like, oh, I don't care about the etymology of the fucking word. I believe what I believe. I don't care what it's named after. What does it matter? I don't know. And I heard this stuff all the time, and it drove me crazy. But the absolute truth one, because I would try to talk to people about this when I was here, because that didn't make sense. I know that there was no human being, let alone one who studied this, who would be trapped by that. So I tried to figure out, like, well, what is absolute truth? If you were to define it, like it is absolutely true. Okay, I guess that from my understanding of reality, something can always be more true. So, like, you know, my name is TJ Whitehead. That's true. But it's not absolutely true. My name is Tony Lee Whitehead Jr. That's more true than the statement before. And, you know, I'm TJ Whitehead. I'm a human being. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. And you can always keep going and regress to something that's more and more true, to a fundamental truth. Now, eventually you can get there, I guess. Eventually, I guess on theory, you can get to something that is true. And this applies to morality as well. But I can't know absolute truth. I'm incapable of knowing it and declaring anything to be absolutely true, morality included. So I always go back to that and say that the only thing that I know is absolutely true. There is one thing I know is absolutely true, and that's that I exist. That's it. I don't know if you two exist. I can't prove that. Like, I know that I'm talking, but I could be a brain in a vat, and this could be a whole experiment going on. I have no way of proving that. It's like a Rene Descartes thing. I think, therefore I am and stuff. But that's the only thing I know that's absolutely true. So if you want to appeal to absolute truth, you have to demonstrate that you're capable of understanding it. And I don't see any human being who would actually be convincingly able to do so. And Trevor, what you mentioned about how there's social connections or social replications and how people view morality. And it's God, because you say this a lot when you talk to people like from where we grew up, and they say, well, look at all these other societies that weren't crafted by God, like the United States of America was, and how you could like the nobles could just kill people, and get away with it. And so I don't know, like we did for hundreds of years in the United States of America with no problem at all.
I was going to say that I'll come back.
No,
Go ahead, Trevor.
please,
sorry. Well, there are times when I want to go back to school because I'm just like, man, our history books that we learn from, totally not true. So much of that was changed to fit their narrative. And granted, I self-learn, but it's just one of those things where I'm just like, boy, you guys really just shape things to be here's what we were presented as absolute truth. I absolutely know that what God's word says is true. Okay. And if asked, but how do you know that? Like what you were just saying, TJ, about being able to understand absolute truth. Then all that we had to do was chalk it up to, well, that's a higher understanding that I can attain to. God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And responsibility off. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yo, it's true. Yeah. It's
okay.
Yeah, like they're saying that
it drives me nuts. So
no, yeah, it is. Like, it is because it's a self-defeating statement that I know it's absolutely true. Well, how do you know? Well, because God said it. And it's like, well, how do you understand it? Well, I can't. Then you don't fucking know. Okay. Then so don't say that. Like that drove me insane. Were you gonna say something, Trevor? I don't know if I cut you off there.
Well, it was kind of tangential. I'll go ahead and jump into it. So I think about kind of where they are coming from with this argument about objective or subjective morality or objective subjective truth. And I think part of it is like, okay, if morality is founded in God and the Bible, then they have like this sure foundation, right, from which they can then judge the world and say this is good or bad. And their argument would be, well, as soon as that stops being true, well, then you have no basis for your morality. And so any individual could then choose to kill their neighbor, right? Because the ultimate source of morality, is their own person, right? I think that's sort of where the argument comes from. I'm sort of trying to steel man it as best I can, and I think my whole point is like, well, I mean, you could look at the history of philosophy in the last 200 years. I mean, you're not the first person to think about this, and there is a basis for morality in society. There's the whole like Kantian ethics, right? Or there's this, we all share this sort of subjective intuitions about morality, just like ice cream, right? Like we all kind of know what chocolate ice cream is. Like we share sort of this thing, even though it's subjective, even though we're in a sense making this up, as people, it's common to all of us. And that alone, I think, is a justification for a morality that can be enforced in a society.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a justification. I do agree that it absolutely is justification. Simply, well, let me put a pin in that. Actually, it's perfect. No, it's perfect. I was going with the justification for it because they are correct. Like if you, in one sense, that if we don't have like the rules for morality listed on a stone tablet, like if there's no actual rock solid absolute list of what is right and what is wrong, incomplete or otherwise, that then ultimately it is up to every person. Because I think about this with why, for example, with murder. and like you mentioned that, why is murder illegal? And why does it seem like any society you can think of, like any civilization of people that got together and like tried to make things work, like there were always rules against murder. Now, a lot of them weren't great. A lot of them weren't great. Some people were perfectly fine to kill, but overall, no society says, yeah, kill whoever you want, it's fine. As that's never happened. And it never happened because that society would collapse immediately. It would collapse. There's like, the thing about human beings is like Trevor mentioned, that we do seem to share a general idea of empathetic reciprocity to make this whole system, this whole being alive thing work, because you'll see this with a lot of mammals. Like mammals are a lot more social, and you could even say moral. They have like their own codes that they follow than reptiles. Reptiles have pretty much none. Reptiles will do anything because they're not communal creatures like we are. And human beings, we're not like by ourselves. We're not that impressive. Well, most of us, but we're not that impressive by ourselves. We're not particularly strong. We're good runners, but we're not all that fast. Like pretty much anything can beat us in a sprint. We don't have scales or fangs or wings. And by ourselves, like left to the elements, we're toast. It's done. But you put enough of us together, we can go to the fucking moon. And it's like, that is like, it's as far as I know, no one else has done that. That's just been people. So hooray for us on that. But it's in order for us to survive, we need each other. Which is why like psychopathy is so dangerous, because if you have someone who just doesn't give a fuck about anybody, that puts social cohesion at rest and our very survival at rest. And I think that like basing like, because like morality, I always like objective morality can't really exist, I don't think, because morality is contingent upon other things existing. Like if there was a universe of nothing but rocks, no morality in the universe, none. None whatsoever. So if it needs something else, it's not going to be objective. It's not like a physics equation or something like that. And and so what we're talking about with how this is uncomfortable, right? It is not easy, which is why it's so insulting that people revert to the hilarious claim that, well, of course there's objective morality. It happens to be from this particular book that I've chosen. So that's okay. That doesn't make sense, right? Because then there's other objective moralities that you could have chosen, which makes it subjective. This is not difficult.
Yeah.
But
100%. Thank you for going there.
Yes. It's just so. But the alternative, which seems to be the case, is that you have to do the hard work of deciding what moral codes we should follow and enforce. And that is difficult. And you're going to get it wrong sometimes. You're not going to, we evolve as a society. We find out what works and what doesn't. But the first principle, that's what I want to get to. I was kind of meandering until I get here, is that when you start to, it gets kind of weird when you get down to, is that all of our morality and beliefs, even, well, morality definitely is irrational. If you get down to it, it's all irrational. And I say that because let's say we're talking about murder. And you're like, okay, well, I think murder should be illegal. Why? Well, because, if you just got to murder anybody you want, you could murder me or my family and friends. I wouldn't like that. I suspect you wouldn't like that either. All right, that's true. But what's so bad about murdering you or me? It's like, well, if you murder all these folks, human society will destabilize. Like, well, what's so great about human society? And it's like, well, if it destabilizes, more people die. What's wrong with people dying? And you keep going back to this. Eventually, you get to, well, I just don't like it. Like, that's what it comes down to.
Boo. Yeah.
Say what, Trevor?
Murder boo is one way I've heard it described. It's fundamentally an intuition. It's not anything more.
Exactly. Yeah, it's because we seem to have a general goal in mind that living is better than dying. Usually, I mean, there are times when that's not even true. But yeah, what I wanted to also mention is you guys talking about them. I forget which one of you said it, about how they're like, oh yeah, the Bible has this system, we follow it here, and that's going to predict our morality for them. Is that even going by the morality of the Bible is not objective at all. Trevor, go ahead. You were laughing. Go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up.
Let's go. Let's go.
But you mentioned it, TJ, that like even it's still subjective in the end, because you have to choose which one of the many different conflicting commands of God, or which God, are you going to accept as your basis for morality? And there's no way to judge between that except through our own reasoning and power, right? Forcing, what's your own rhetorical goal as that community. You're going to decide one way or the other on that. And so it doesn't make it objective. It just steps back and becomes subjective at a higher level, I guess.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention something. So a lot of the comparisons that we've been making between objective or subjective morality, objective, subjective truth, reality, those three things, we've compared to things that like the existence of rocks. This is a rock because by definition it is a rock. And that comparison is often drawn paralleled in the IFB community, the Christian community, of as absolute as I know this is a rock, absolute that I know that this is truth. It's apples and oranges.
It is.
You can't put them together. There's a fact that by definition, this is a chapstick. I cannot put that way of thinking and that reality onto something like morality, something like truth. I can't. And like you guys just mentioned, at one point they might be able to say, yes, this is absolutely true. But if you keep moving it back, it all is subjective.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just wanted to mention that that's, as as someone who majored in science and taught science for years, that was something like with creation versus evolution. Just like, okay, both of them, we can't go back and observe them, so they can't be proven. However, there is a difference between fact that we know and what one group of people likes to throw in that same line of thinking, absolute truth. I hope that made sense.
Of course.
Sometimes I have a hard time communicating what I'm trying to say. So
no, I follow that.
You're doing great. Yeah.
Yeah, you may have lost Trevor, but not old TJ. No,
that's easy though. Yeah.
And with like the wild comparisons and stuff like that too, that it is also really funny that they'll point to like an Iron Age warlord, like a text written by people who didn't know what the sun was and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, this has all the answers that you're gonna need in life. And it's like, really? Do you really think that? I don't know if you actually buy that. And it's funny just because like this is what frustrated me too, is that it's to this day, is that you will bring up stuff in the Bible and they've never run across it or given a lot of thought. It's just I remember. So this one actually they would know. This was a debate I remember having in college at Maranatha Baptist Bible College. No relation to the high school we attended, folks. But Rahab, the story of Rahab, when the spies, was it Joshua and Caleb? They went into Jericho, and Rahab hides them when the I can't remember, was it Jericho? I can't remember the story, but Rahab hides them when the guards are looking for them, and so when the guards come in and she said, I don't know who the spies are, and they leave. And then they say, okay, thanks, Rahab. We appreciate it. Here's what you need to do. You need to tie like a red bow outside of your window. So when we come and rampage the town, we know it could have been Jericho then, it doesn't matter. But when we come and rampage the town, we know to keep you safe. And they say, all right, cool. So they spare Rahab's life, and God rewards Rahab by putting her in the lineage of Christ. And it's like, did God just reward a lie? The answer is yes, by the way. The answer is yes. God rewarded Rahab for lying. So I would ask you, like, okay, so does that mean lying is not always wrong? And they would say, no, it actually is. It's like, you guys heard that conversation?
I remember this argument.
Right? Do you remember that? Because I never made sense to have people say, go ahead.
Even my dad, you guys remember how absolute my dad was.
Yeah.
Okay. Even he, in the last 10 years of his life, started coming around to, and that was one of the arguments that he and I talked about. I was just like, Dad, you can't, in one hand, tell this story as a good thing and then say there are no circumstances whatsoever in existence to where a lie can be good. And he actually that was one of the things that he started. He's like, I think you got something there. He started coming around with some of his ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was all.
Go ahead, Trevor.
It reminds me of that sort of question, like a Nazi's at the door and you're hiding the Jew in the basement. Do you lie? I man, so much ink spilt over this question. It's like, what a waste of time.
What a waste.
Like, you know what I mean? Which
is.
actually kind of just reminds me of something else. It's like it's sort of like I think they call this like divine command theory or something like this. You know, like you get everything from God as your basis for your morality, but it handicaps moral thinking among people.
Yep.
And so people don't develop like the skill of thinking about like these sort of situations, right? And I think that's an important skill to try to develop as a human.
Yeah, it's poisonous.
And this was the whole umbrella in justifies the means. Do you remember how much that was brought to us?
They didn't like that.
They did not like it.
They didn't like it.
Never justify the means, for example. And so, yeah, it was interesting how it's like they would really push that point and preach that point, and we're just like, excuse me, Rahab in that story. Oh, that's different. Okay.
Yeah, and the ends justify the means is because like the answer is yes sometimes, but sometimes not. Like this is kind of simple. Like what ends and what means are we going for here? I'd like to know. And this also was with two other examples that I always brought up. That once again, like you would think with a religion this old, there would be good answers. Finally, like someone would come across something, but there were never any good answers. And which is why honestly, it's why I was so angry. Actually, for a little bit, I still am. I was so angry for a long time that I knew plenty of like really intelligent people, and I would corner them and find out they didn't know either, and they had no good answer other than, well, I just like. Come on, then why are you so adamant about this? Why are you pretending that this is such an obvious truth when you don't have an answer for that? It's not like, yeah, I don't have an answer for the origin of life. Okay, all right, you got me, but I'm not telling you it definitely happened one way. You'll go to hell if you don't believe me. There's a little bit of different there. Right. But with the genocides of the Old Testament, like one of the easiest ones you could possibly bring up, where it's not up for debate that you have the words of God and it says, go into this town, massacre the soldiers, the men, the women, the children, the elderly, their pets,
the animals.
Yeah, the fucking animals. And it's like, all right, you got a lot of work ahead of you to justify this other than they were worshiping the wrong God. Okay, so does that mean it'd be okay if I did that now? And so, well, no, it's different. Why? If the morality is objective, why is it okay in this instance, but not in another? And one of my favorites ones was 9/11. Because if you're going to tell me that what Joshua did was okay because God told him to, how are you going to say that what Muhammad Assad did was wrong because God told him to? I'd like to know. Like, please give me an answer there. And the answer always was, it was the wrong God. Not an impressive answer. Not impressive at all. Biblical slavery was one too. This one is really funny to me. Well, darkly funny, is that I knew the passages about slavery, but I was always taught, well, those are servants. Those people, were given a wage. They leave whenever they want. And then you actually read is like, well, no, that they would refer to indentured servitude. That you work for 6 years and then you get the 7th year, you get to go free. But then you find out that only applied to Hebrew males. It did not apply to Hebrew women. It did not apply to foreigners at all. And like the Bible makes it very clear in Leviticus that these people will be your property forever. Those are the exact words. And it's like, you can pass them on to your children. And it's like, this came from God. Like, this is God saying this is okay. And the hoops people jump through to try to justify this. Say, oh, no, that's not really what it means. Or you got to understand it was a different time. All right, is morality objective or not? Okay, because like who's the moral relativist now?
We're back to it.
Right, it's like you're making my argument for me right here. Yeah, that's kind of fucked up and odd there. But those, it just bothers me that the conversations never seem to get beyond that to a lot of folks. They just ate it up and accepted it,
Yeah, well, and I think Trevor hit the nail on the head with how you said earlier. So much ink has been spilled. on this argument that it just comes down to, come on,
Yeah, move on already, right? And
yeah.
okay, so this conversation kind of reminds me of this problem with the Bible puts on people, in that it's vague and it doesn't speak. Well, we have these things we call systematic theologies, but they're all at odds with each other. The Bible doesn't actually speak with one voice from beginning to end. Like slavery is a great example, right? There's conflicting views of slavery throughout the Bible. And so the fundamentalists, any religious group that comes to the Bible as their holy text and then says this one thing, has to decide what that one thing is, right? And so, and they're going to do it for all sorts of reasons. They're going to have their own interests and rhetorical goals and reasons for drawing that line as some place or another. And in the end, it's all them. It's all subjective. It's all, there simply isn't a single moral code or single unifying voice to the whole Bible, right? And that puts that's why there's millions and millions of religious texts, right, on interpretation and disagreements. And it's kind of laughable to me now. Is like,
it is,
guys, obviously this is the case. Like, the fact that you're still arguing about this, like, just confess that there is not a single systematic theology that puts it all together, because it was written over thousands of years by different authors with different goals, right? Like, they all had a different purpose in mind. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, like, they all had a different audience in mind and how they interpret the Jesus legend, the Jesus myth. Like, they're all trying to accomplish things, and they all change the facts a little bit to get at what they're trying to accomplish. And like, once you understand that's what the Bible is actually doing, then I think maybe you could approach it in a little more healthy way.
Yeah, that was spot on. And going back to the whole how earlier we were talking about how there's always been a moral compass or a common cultural morality throughout the history of mankind. Um, to the way I see it, it's not based on religion, it's based on society survival, the survivals of society, the survivals of culture. That's what, and sure, call it primal, but because you mentioned murder as an example, murder's bad because societies would be wiped out if it was just, yeah, kill anyone you want to willy-nilly at any given time. And so to try to put something like that as basic and primal and instinctual into under the umbrella of only morality, due to a religious motivation is silly. It's wrong. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying that people can't have morality based on their faith. Totally respect that. You do you. But for them to argue and argue and argue and continuing this, creating the wheel, inventing the wheel, that it is objective and there can be no subjective component is ridiculous. In my opinion.
No, right. It's in our subjective opinions on this or whatever. But
right.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite Bible verse, my absolute favorite. It's number 2 is a distant second. Is the one that says God is not the author of confusion. Very funny. It is so goddamn funny to me. And like, even in high school, I thought that was funny. Like, looking at, it's been nothing but confusion. Like, it has been absolute confusion from day. Just like, everyone out there, do yourselves a favor and read up about the creation of the early church after the death of Jesus. Wild times. Just like a dozen different versions of Christianity sprang up immediately, all having different ideas just on who or what Jesus was, like that from the foundation. And they all had different interpretations of this until one of them or a couple of them won out and they survived over time. But this idea that there is this is like, I honestly don't like the phrase. You'll hear this sometimes when, and this is, I'm torn on this because you know how much, like, the cult we grew up in, how much they love money, or how much they worship it. Like, they actually do worship the money. And it's like, you ever like the way they worship American capitalism in a lot of ways, that, you know, if you are a good person, you follow all the rules, you may not be rich, but you'll be well off. You'll be all right. God will take care of you. You know, he'll make sure that you don't die or you're not destitute or whatever. And if someone has a lot of money, odds are they've been doing the right thing. So it's like a direct correlation to how much direct relationship of how much money you have and how good of a person you are, or how smart or how hardworking or how resourceful, and let's be real, how godly you are. That God's gonna reward you with personal wealth. And like, not all the time, but 9 out of 10, you can probably tell this person's been doing the right thing. It's honestly, it's another reason Trump won, because he was the richest guy on stage. What are they going to say, you know? And that's always bugged me, because if you read, once again, the words of Jesus, Jesus never said a kind thing about rich people his entire life. Like, Jesus loved nothing more than to shit on rich people. So if you're gonna, they even came up, do you remember when they would say that the camel through the eye of the needle thing, that they actually meant a gate in Jerusalem? Totally made up. Totally made up. There is no gate called camel. Eye of the needle. It was completely made up. Which stunned me. Like, that was 100% garbage. Like, that it was, oh yeah, rich people can get in. Jesus didn't really mean that. Or the way to get saved, like Jesus, like, there's a guy, the rich young ruler. What does he ask Jesus? Rabbi, what must I do to be saved? Jesus says, sell all your stuff, give it to poor people, follow me. Direct is what he tells them. He doesn't do it. It's like, well, you guys haven't sold all your stuff. No one's done this. Like, that's what Jesus said. And he's pretty clear on this. And but what they say, that these folks aren't actually following the teaching of Jesus. Yeah, that's true. In that sense, they are. But I still don't like the phrase real Christian. Like people who do like evil things, or like they're cancers on society. And a lot of folks like say, well, they're not real Christians. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. What do you want from me? Like, we're gonna say like the popes who ordered crusades weren't real Christians? Like, where are we setting this arbitrary line of what a real Christian is? It's just because it can mean what you want it to mean. Like, it's been interpreted 1,000 different ways by 1,000 different people over time. And the question that I have is, when they say that, well, you know, the teachings of God are real, but people are twisting it to do something evil with it. I don't buy that either. I don't buy it, because let's say you were God. All right. Like, let's say Heather's God. All right. So Heather created the universe, and through him all things persist. But and then, Heather, you gave us an instruction manual for how the world should run. And I'm like, okay, this should be good. I'm going to write it, you know, in 3 languages, only 3. I know there's multiple languages, but I'm going to write in 3 languages. And I know most of you won't be able to read for thousands of years, but hey, I'm sure this will work out. This won't be co-opted by the rich and the powerful and the elite and everything, and you will be exploited for it. So I'll give you those directions. And then you check back with humanity 1,000 years later, and you find out there's this sprawling empire built with your name. People are wearing hats with Heather is awesome, Heather, queen of the universe, and all this. And then you look and you're like, oh, they're enslaving people, like wearing like the symbol of Heather on their chest. It's like, Heather says this is great. Wouldn't it be contingent upon you to say, okay, folks, I'm going to sit down and say, you guys got this wrong. This is incorrect. But instead, Heather says, nope, I'm going to rely on fallible human beings to argue about it and for the right ones to win. I was like, okay, if that's the case, you have a lower opinion of God than I do. I would expect more from a mortal human being than you expect from Almighty God. And that always kind of bugged me here. But yeah, I just anyone add more to that? That's just funny stuff on that issue. Before we move on, we got a couple more questions here. We'll be able to do them all, Trevor. I'm sorry. We're already an hour into this. So that was great. But all right. So
let's keep going.
Yeah. All right. So this is a very good related question. Do you believe Christianity is a net positive or negative in the world? And we'll go to Heather first on that one. That's a hard one. Honestly, that I found this to be the most difficult one.
It's because that whole aspect of look at the damage that has been done throughout time in the name of Christianity. And it's that whole real Christian versus what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, my wife is an atheist. She grew up in a Christian community, not IFB. And if you guys are hearing a purr, I got my cat right here. He's so anyway, sorry about that. He's a very loud purr.
All right.
I asked her even just last night, I said, does it bother you that I still ascribe to a measure of the Christianity that I was raised with? And we talked about it, and she said it's hard for me to believe that you can because of the specifics that I've rejected. And I started crying actually because this is something that it's difficult to let go of. I looked at her
Yeah.
and I said, I don't know what other word to use. I don't know what other word to use, to define where I am right now. So I believe that there are good parts of Christianity and its contribution to mankind. But I have to say that so much damage has been done from the Crusades to, gosh, it's very hard for me to answer that question. Can we move on to Trevor?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's no problem. Yeah, Trevor, what you got?
Yeah. Sure. I think okay. I think about it. I guess I kind of have two thoughts in my head about this. The first, I kind of find Christianity kind of fascinating in that it's been this ever evolving and changing thing, actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like back to like slavery, right? Like you had the Bible absolutely supports slavery. Like you have it's almost an airtight argument for it in the Bible. And yet during the Civil War time, and in England, it was Christians also on the other side of that were reinterpreting the Bible and
Mhm.
and using the Bible again as moral justification to get rid of slavery, right? And I think there's a seed there that is of value in the Christian religion, and that maybe this is true of other religions, probably is, but there is sort of a way for this thing to morph and change and to update over time. And I think generally that's a good thing. We like um in that sense, like I'm not totally pessimistic about the future of Christianity in the world, and that it might do good. Um on the flip side, like personally, like why would you just take on made up beliefs about the world, right? It's all just the invention of humans. That's all this thing is. And how could just made up beliefs possibly create like a better world in that sense? Isn't it better to sort of um, uh, register ourselves onto reality, like instead of this made up thing that we're trying to give value to or follow? And that just seems like what a weird project to be pursuing. And so like I would advise, I would like encourage people to leave in that sense and find another foundation for it. But ultimately, like that doesn't mean that it's not good for the world necessarily. I think that it can be, but it may not be too. Like right, if anything, if we kind of look at the way things have progressed in the world in the past decade, we're going more towards authoritarianism, and it's led by the Christian right more than any other group. So I don't know if it's going to end well here, but it's
Yeah.
possible.
So can I mention a thought
Yeah.
on that last point that you said? And I may be the unpopular voice here in this moment, with this, is I think we need to be very careful as we've come kind of on the other side of the way we were raised
Hmm.
to not condemn for any reasons or to any extent. I shouldn't say for any reasons, to condemn the right for people to have their beliefs and to believe 100%
Totally.
in them.
Yeah.
So your last argument of that, can it really be good if it's all made up?
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with that because it's like, as much as we want to say, how do you know that it's real?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that it's not?
Mm-hmm.
That it can't be? Do you see what I'm saying? So the way, and this is where I am with my faith, um, and other people, is you are fine to believe what you want to believe, and I know that you're going to believe it 100%, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, as long as it doesn't bring harm. And from the level of living with someone who ascribes to their religion so vehemently that it causes discord in the home. That's kind of something that my wife and I deal with my sister.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. To genocides throughout history in the name of religion. Um, and that's where it's like, okay, it's I don't believe that it's right for us to say that something absolutely cannot be possibly true.
Mm-hmm.
We can't know that. And if you want to believe that, that's great. But a person who believes in it, as long as they're not causing harm to other people, it's okay for them to believe that. Does this make sense?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
I'm trying to
totally.
say?
I'm not saying,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm not trying to force this onto people.
No,
Um,
no,
I was
no.
hoping to
I
use
just
the
think we
word
need to
like
be careful.
advise or yeah, suggest.
Yeah,
Because there might be a better
Yeah.
quality.
So, man, a lot to say about that one. All right. First, I'll go with what Trevor mentioned about: is there a scenario, from what he said, like, is there a scenario in which having faith in something that, we'll say, we have no evidence is true is good? Like, that's what I'll go with. And like, good, so that's kind of a loaded word, I guess, but it can have social utility. I'll put it that way. It definitely can. That if I created a religion that said, listen, these are the words of the Almighty God, uh, you know, I'm going to cover everything I missed 3,000 years ago in the Ten Commandments. Sex with children is bad, which, by the way, not in the Bible anywhere. Want to remind everybody that not anywhere. You can't find it at all. Slavery is an absolute no-go. Respect human beings as individuals. Now, I don't know, just like you could make a list of things that would definitely make society stronger, and it could all be based on nothing. But if everyone followed it, society would be strong. I don't know if it would do a lot for, like you said, Trevor, like inquiry, because it kind of stifles it. That you're like, oh, here are the answers. You don't have to worry about going it farther. I think that I can see social utility because like religion does have, like we mentioned, just with the community aspect of it and bringing people together around a common cause, and having places to go for big events and community. I can see the positives of that, and it unfortunately comes with the negatives that we all know very well: Spanish Inquisition and stuff like that. And when people start going with it, but I also wanted to address what Heather mentioned about how we have to let's see, what did you say? You said that well, we can't take away anyone's right to believe anything. I mean, that's theirs. There's no way I
right.
can take that. One thing, how can I put this? I don't hold all beliefs with equal respect, though, is what I'm gonna say here, is that
Right.
people say this a lot. Like, you didn't say this, Heather, but people say that it's important to respect people's beliefs. No, it is not. Like, I'm sorry, it isn't. Like, there are 1,000 beliefs you can name right now that you don't respect. Like, if someone thinks that, yeah, burning orphanage is cool, no, burning an orphanage is not cool. You can believe that, but I don't have to respect that. And so, like, that
No,
applies to.
it's a respecting people's right to believe.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
but I can't do
Not
anything
what
about
they
that.
believe,
Yeah,
right to believe.
I can't take away their right. That's not up to me at all.
Right.
And I mean, I wouldn't like try to change the law that you have to, believe X, Y, and Z. I don't believe in thought crime. And what's but so that's my caveat on that, what Heather said. But Heather, it does touch on to something that's very true that I don't know if you guys know. Well, Trevor, I guess it applies more to you than Heather. But ever since relieving fundamentalism, I've noticed very quickly that I'm no longer a fundamentalist, but I still think like one. I still do. Like my immediate, like whenever I hear something, black and white thinking, like this is correct or this is completely wrong. And I have to work through that. Like I have to actively try to remind myself that things aren't that simple. Nothing in life is really that simple. And so it is kind of difficult for me to go that way. But I would say with beliefs in general that I think that I try to make my belief stated on something that is true as possible, or as true as I can confidently believe. And there's things I believe that I couldn't possibly prove. My mom loves me. Good luck proving that. I can't prove that my mom loves me, right? So I understand that you can believe things that I can't prove correct or incorrect. I just have to base it on my best guess on reality. And so I do get that part. But like Heather said, once it affects other people, that's when the problem arises. It's like, I'm going to do something because, Vishnu commanded it. It's like, well, Vishnu's not in the room. Vishnu's not voting. So they have nothing to do with this whatsoever. But it does just, but then again, all right, like, what makes my personal belief any better than an imaginary one, right? It's like it is all based on subjectivity. But here's my point. At least with someone who doesn't base it on some sort of external deity or concept or a deity, that you can more likely reason with them or debate with them. Because like if I say we should do this because God said so, good luck trumping God, right? Like, what are you going to say that's possibly going to be stronger than what God says? And that's where I think the problem runs into with like at least crafting society on belief. Because personally, you can do whatever you like. No one can stop you from that. But that's a good one. There was one too that I didn't write down that Trevor said here. We'll go for a full 2 hours here. If you guys don't mind, we can probably cover another half hour here. I can imagine a couple more questions.
I actually expected it to be at least 2 hours.
I did too. You know what? That's so glad. I don't know, Trevor, but I had the same thought. This will probably be a 2-hour conversation. I'm not surprised at all.
Yep.
All right, we'll go with Heather first here. What does it mean to you to live a good life?
I don't want to cause harm to other people in any way. If I can help it. A good life to me.
Can you guys hear that?
What's that?
Oh, okay. I heard a bunch of static. Did you guys hear that? Trevor,
I didn't.
I heard it.
You're
too.
muted. Okay. Huh. What's going on?
Maybe we should restart. Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
All right.
I didn't hear that.
All right. So we'll go with you first, Heather. What do you think it means to live a good life?
Okay. So, to live a good life for me it's a very simple answer. Do you mean good morally?
Trevor, what did you mean?
Is that what you mean?
Oh, in that question, I had more morally kind of in mind, I guess, like to live a good and moral, upright life. It's kind of back to the subjectivity of morality is what I had in my mind, but we could expand it for sure to make a more interesting conversation.
No, Heather, you're too. Heather, I was gonna. So I shouldn't be surprised that you asked more clarification on that, because I was going to make a joke on this question whenever it got to me. It's like, what does it mean to live a good life? And my answer was going to be lots of sex, lots of drugs. That was going to be my answer to the question. Because please explain to me how that's a bad life. That sounds great. But all right, well, we'll reset here. A morally good life, Heather.
Okay. I don't know. I've really become the where it's like to each their own, as long as you're not causing harm to other people. I don't want to sound repetitive with that, but it's like what I used to believe, it was the way I was raised, and I ascribe to those beliefs myself. until, as far as like morally good versus bad, my whole world became shaken and just turned topsy-turvy, when, let's see, it was probably around like 2006, 2007, when I started to wonder, what is this that's going on with me? Um, so I was on quite lot of years of a journey with my sexuality, because first it was, this isn't possible, to this is happening and it's disgusting. What kind of person am I?
Uh,
To where
Yeah.
I am, and I won't go through all the steps of the journey, but looking back on, I don't think I was ever the type of person that was hellfire and brimstone, but I held to those judgments so hard that I feel like that was a completely different life to where I am now, which is, you know what? I my live is not affecting, if it's not affecting you, then it's none of your business. And so I look at a good life, even morally, as if I can bring a smile to someone's face or help someone, versus causing harm for the sake of doing harm, then that's a good day. That's a good life. So, pretty simple answer on my part, but that's kind of where I am.
I like it. Trevor?
yeah, I love it, Heather. Thanks.
Yeah.
I I just looked up the Westminster Catechism. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to
I'm sitting here
glorify
going
God and
hearts and
enjoy.
feels, and he's like ancient text.
Yeah,
That's
I got the
hilarious.
answer right here, guys.
That's great.
Yeah. What does that even mean? Chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Like I kind of had that pat answer for years of my life. That's what
Yep.
it means to enjoy life, is to, or to live the good life, right? No. Uh. Yeah. It feels like a bit of a harder question without religion, right? It's something
Mhm.
we actually have to like contemplate. There's not a Westminster Confession that just gives you what it would mean in your particular situation to live a good life. We're kind of making it up as we go
Yeah.
in large part, and that's also what I think is really cool about being a human, right? Is we get to make this up. We get to create cities and worlds and a family or a neighborhood or a community, and it's like all these things make being a person, being a human in the world, great, good, exciting, really, really cool. Um, it's not about pleasing a god or following these rules, right? It's necessarily, but it's like these what we create, what we do, the societies that come about through our efforts, I think, are make up the good life for us, in large part. That's kind of how I think about it. I love the harm principle, Heather. I like it, like I live a good day if I am not causing harm to others. I think that's a great way to kind of um, think about our actions and make good moral actions. But I'm reminded. I've been watching a lot of Jordan Peterson, and
I saw you mentioned him, and that's one of the messages.
yeah,
Yeah, we'll get
and
to
oh
him.
my God, this guy, he's such a hack. I
Have
just
you,
am.
Heather? Do you know who Jordan Peterson is? You know?
I don't.
Oh,
I
you're so
Oh,
don't.
well,
lucky. You're
And
don't.
I
so
didn't get a
lucky.
chance to look him up to
Woo, boy.
see what you were referring to.
Yeah.
Imagine like one of the fundamentalist preachers we grew up with who had gone to like got a doctorate or something and come back, but he was like high all the time when he talks. Like that's kind of like Jordan Peterson right there. It's just like he's so
Great.
weird. Yeah, Trevor, go ahead. Sorry, I want to hijack your story. Go ahead.
Sure. He's got this idea that anybody who lives a moral life is basically stealing the Christian
Yeah.
worldview, the whole Christian thing. Like, that's ours. And if you're doing that, you're living inconsistently. You can't live a good Christian, a good moral life.
Ooh.
You're living a false life. He would say. Like, as soon as you start living morally, then you're living as a Christian. And
Yeah, you're
so,
definitionally or functionally a Christian if you live a
right.
moral life. Is his point? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of bullshit. But that's I forgot where I was going with that. Other than I think that's just a really bad argument. So
Can I make a couple comments
sure,
there? And I'll start with that one. So that's really interesting. I can't remember how old I was. I might have been a young teenager at the point. At the point that I asked my mom this question, and that is, it was in response to a lot of repetitive sermons and teachings in a time period where it just seemed to come. What
we're losing you,
love
Heather. You're cutting
is.
it. Oh wait, try that.
Sorry.
Repetitive sermons that what?
Sorry, repetitive sermons that brought up the aspect, I shouldn't say fact, um, that you can't know what true love is, what real love is outside of God,
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
outside of
Yeah.
Christ. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
That always made me scratch my head and I finally went to my mom and I said, so does that mean that you got an unsaved, in our vernacular that we grew up with, an unsaved couple who love each other? Are they just kidding themselves? Is what we're saying is that they are incapable of true unconditional love? And even my mom was just like, no, that's not what that means, because of course they can be. And I was like, but then how? Because we're literally saying that according to what God's word says is that you can't know that ultimate love outside of God. And it's like then we're taking away. We're taking away the ability for people who aren't saved, who don't know God, to not be able to truly love. How can we do that? Like how arrogant can we be to ascribe that to the majority of mankind?
Yeah.
And even my mom was just like, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And it made me think of that with that last point that you made, Trevor, with that whole Peterson argument. Is if you're living morally, that's not how you're supposed to be, unless you're a Christian.
Yeah.
As if we've got what's the phrase where it's like you've got, only Christianity can be moral.
Mm-hmm.
There's only Christian morality. Any morality out of that is not morality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then something else real quick. You started, Trevor, with your statement that it is a hard question of what does it mean to live a good life. Sometimes it's hard to separate that in terms of morally good from religion. Me personally, when I finally was able to break from the fundamentalism that I grew up believing and was raised with, that's when I felt the freest to be able to learn what a truly good life was. I wanted to put that out there.
Heather, something you said reminded me of, well, you mentioned love, right? And how there's this idea that we can't fully understand all the aspects of love. I think C.S. Lewis had some argument like this, right? Without God, like it's we're deficient. And what that ultimately means, though, is that you're now judging the rest of the world, right, outside of
Yeah,
Christianity. Everybody else
exactly.
out there is lesser than you because
Yep.
they are incapable of this kind of love that only you have. And it's one thing I really hate about at least the type of Christian religion that we were a part of, is how it makes
Yeah.
an us-them dichotomy in the world. And
Yeah.
now it's like everybody out there is unsaved or saved,
Is
and
lesser.
is lesser,
There's
and
that.
right.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
you can't like approach them as an equal anymore.
Right.
And that that changes how you can be friends with them. It changes your relationship. It changes everything about that in a very destructive way, I think.
Yeah, it's that whole aspect of, a Christian will say, "Oh, I'm not saying I'm better than you," and
But
it's
I
like,
am.
"But you
Yeah.
are, but you are,"
Yeah.
and yeah, it's very toxic. It's very backwards from what they want to attest to and testify of, uh, and it's just, I don't know, it's sad.
Yeah. They I wanted to go through these. I guess there's so much great stuff there. But
Sorry.
Heather, you were just talking about how people would say that, like I'm sure I mentioned that we're better, but we're not really. We're all equal in the eyes of God. This reminds me a lot of when you would talk to them about, homosexuality, and they say something like, well, okay, so you think that it's a sin for, this woman to love a woman or a man to love a man? I mean, like, I was like, well, look, it's a sin. Like, sin is just sin, right? I mean, like, speeding when you don't have to, that's a sin as well. It's like, all right, but you don't like ban speeders from coming to church, right? Like that. I don't hear any sermons on this shit. You seem to it seems like in your belief system, not all sin is equal, right? That kind of that's something that they bring up a lot. And listen, this is kind of embarrassing. I kind of hate to say this, but you guys are talking about, well, Heather mentioned the story with your mom and how you were saying, who do we think we are to say that these people don't know what love is because they don't happen to follow our religion? How could anyone possibly? Your mom's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And it is kind of surprising how like little moments like that set off light bulbs, that you're so accustomed to be thinking of your group and the people who could hack it, like the ones who aren't excised or
Yeah.
kicked out and everything. And you're like, oh yeah, we've got it. And it shelters you from even considering not just the outside world, but like the concept of linear time and humanity. Like you don't even consider that really. It's why you can people so easily dismiss the murders in the Old Testament. Like, well, hey, that's a story. You don't think of them as actual human beings who were terrified while swords sliced them open. Like, and so you don't think about that. And this is the embarrassing thing to me, is that there was an HBO show called Rome that I watched back in, I don't know, 2007, 2008 or something. And it's a great show for anyone who hasn't seen it. It covers what you'd expect. It covers, Caesar and the crossing the Rubicon and the Romans civil war and everything, Caesar's dictatorship, his assassination, the rise of Octavian and Augustus Caesar and all that. But what's great about the show, I'm getting somewhere with this, trust me. What's great about the show is that what's great about the show is that the show takes place on like two separate levels. It shows everything you'd expect with, Mark Antony and Caesar and Cleopatra and all that. But it also takes place through the eyes of two regular Roman soldiers, like two regular people. And their names are Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo. And they are the only two common soldiers Caesar ever mentioned in his journeys. Like when he talked about his conquest and everything, his campaigns. And we don't know much about them. All we know is that Caesar wrote that, hey, these are two good, everyday, regular soldiers, not aristocrats or anything. And they have a good rivalry with each other, and they seem to be pretty good dudes. Enough for Caesar to write about them. They must have been pretty exceptional. But the show just shows everything that plays out through the eyes of a regular Roman citizen. And Lucius Vorenus, he retires from the military and he starts a butcher shop. And he has a grand opening, because those they had back then. It's weird how similar life is even 2,000 years ago to today. And he has this statue, this bust of the god Janus, the god of beginnings. And the grand opening happens and someone knocks over the statue and the statue shatters, and he's devastated because he's convinced that since someone desecrated this statue, that his business is going to fail, his family's going to starve. And you like really feel for this guy. And then it just hit me watching this. Is like, I know this is like a fictional-ish character, but like I'm really invested in this human being. There's a human being like this actually existed, like someone who actually cared about their business, their family, their friends. Never heard anything about the gospel of what was before Jesus, but about anything about the Old Testament God. Certainly nothing about Jesus Christ. This guy went to hell. like why? Like this is just a normal dude. And so you start looking at people in the past and how they just don't believe what you believe, and that the fact that they're so easily dismissed is kind of disturbing in a lot of ways. But I like seeing that. And with the functional Christian thing that Trevor brought up, this actually, I heard this a lot growing up, that even people who were non-believers, that doing the right thing, I think this is another question that dovetails in with the Peterson question, Trevor, is that, well, they're just following the laws that God set in the Bible anyway. So yeah, it's possible for a non-believer to live a moral life, but not because of anything that they're doing. It's that they're co-opting Christian morality. And it's right. It's kind of a strange argument, especially since it was always strange to me, because by their own admission, these folks admit that these books have not existed forever, right? Like the oldest book is like the book of Job or something, and that's only like 3,000 years old or something. Like we even like the people who believe that 6,000 year creation or whatever, there's plenty of generations who didn't have that, and they all seem to have a morality that we can kind of recognize, that there's rules. You can't just do whatever you want. And I just never understood how they accepted that, because it doesn't make any sense. I think you're kind of forced to, because you have to say that this objective standard of morality does apply to everyone, and you're just kind of stealing it. Oh shit, what do I write down here? I can't write down whatever. Fuck, I'm sorry, guys.
Well, I guess kind of on that, TJ.
Please,
like, you said they're kind of forced to, and I think that's kind of right, because fundamentally they don't think there's a foundation for morality outside of God. And so if someone lives a moral life, then kind of logically speaking, they're living a morality that's based in their understanding of God. So it's a sort of like a circle, I guess.
It is.
So a way that my dad told me once, as far as that argument of, well, what about people, the generations before any text was ever written? The way he described it, and this is presupposing the existence of God, and that he created man in his own image, is that God imprinted on every person a moral compass. And I mean, it's kind of one of those where I'm like, that doesn't bother me, if someone wants to believe that, okay. But the flip side of that, like this Peterson argument, is laughable. It's just like, what? So to say that only morality can exist under Christianity is just, I don't know. My wife just got offended.
What?
I'm saying what? I don't believe that. But
she walked at the wrong time. I see.
She's just like, oh, yeah.
It is pretty interesting. And I remember what I was going to say, Trevor, about the same thing, is that it's like like what Mr. Lewis was talking about, that it was imprinted on us, and that we kind of we have the basic steps of it, but it's just not, fleshed out. And then with Christianity, it's fleshed out. So if they happen to get it right, it's only by luck, that it kind of happens.
It's like the difference between a conscience and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
The conscience is instinctual, whereas the Holy Spirit is above and beyond that. That's the way he always put it.
Yeah. The Holy Spirit one, I don't know if I talked to you guys about that one, about God, this is not, remind me about the Holy Spirit, because I have something to say about this one. This is so many, I don't know, I wish I would have talked about this stuff more as a kid, but I was a kid, and so I brought up questions that really scared me. I was afraid to ask, because I didn't want to offend anybody. Believe it or not, Heather, I did not want to offend people. I didn't want to offend anybody, or generally I thought, well, I'm sure I just don't understand. I'm just a dumb kid, And looking back, nope, I was on the money with a lot of these questions. Turns out I fucking nailed it. But Trevor had mentioned how it is kind of exciting, although it is scary, to figure out morality on our own, because we're gonna get it wrong. And I suspect, look, like 100 years from now, I am not a chill dude. Like 100 years from now, I have some backward, regressive, awful beliefs. I know it, but that's all right, because I would expect someone 100 years from now to figure out, to know more than me, and to see 100 more years of human history. Okay, that works, that doesn't. And that's where people, I think, they get messed up with morality, because I would start talking about this and say, yeah, I don't believe in objective morality. I think that it's up to us to come together and see what happens and try what we think is best. And, while we don't have an objective morality, there are some things we all generally agree on. And what is the best thing to get to those goals? And I remember a guy I went to college with, and he said something like, if you don't have like an absolute standard, it's kind of like saying that this color of blue is better than that color of blue. How could you do that? I was like, well, I would never do that because it's a stupid thing to say. I would never say one color of blue is better. But if I was going to say which color of blue is better at reflecting the light in this building or something, I could prove that. And if my goal is to have a lower or higher amount of reflection of light, I could tell you which color of blue is better in this case. And the example that I use a lot with this is like, there's no objectively correct way to build a house. There isn't. It doesn't exist. There's no like standard that a house, to be a good house, has to have this checklist. It's not. But we do kind of agree on what a house should do. A house should protect you from the elements. It should keep you, insulated. It should have, room, like stuff like, all right, so this type of house is better at keeping rain out. You can prove that. So we all kind of tend to independently gravitate toward the same answer. That's another reason I think of how you can tell if something is true or not, is that people come to the exact same conclusion independently. Like if you were to, like, if Earth was hit by a meteor and like everyone lost all our knowledge, I guarantee you eventually they'd figure out 2 + 2 is 4. Guarantee. If space aliens show up, 2 + 2 is going to be 4. And they will all come to it independently. There's no society that's ever existed that came to the conclusion that 2 + 2 is 5. Hasn't happened because it's true. It's real. And so that if you can focus on that, on like the goals that we all have and what we all independently agree to or conclude is real, you can find some good answers here. And I wanted to, oh no, actually, I wrote down, what do you think heaven is like? I have no idea why I wrote that. Who mentioned heaven? Did anybody mention something about heaven? Because, maybe it was a tangent.
That's always a good one to talk about. But I got one thing about what you're saying though, TJ, but maybe before we move on, because you probably heard of like the Nuremberg trials, right? Like with the Nazis.
Yeah.
And like this sort of comes up in these conversations because if they're like how if morality comes from a community that has maybe like a shared intuition about right and wrong,
right,
which is kind of where I'm at with things generally, or something like that. And what happens when one society has a different morality than another society? How do you judge between those two? And this actually came up, right? Like with the Nazis and with the Jews. Like how does the global society at the time say that the Nazis were wrong? Because sort of the Nazi community didn't think that they were wrong. And so ultimately I think it kind of falls back on moral reasoning in the end, right? Like it's convincing all of us as a community of people that this is the best way forward, and we're going to get that wrong, honestly, at times. But I don't see any way outside of that. Like there's no way out of that box.
Yeah, it's the only tool we have. It's literally the only one that we got. And
we're going back to like God and saying like that doesn't solve it. It just pushes it back.
It just pushes it back. Yes, yeah.
And that's what I was. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just gonna say that's the issue too. Is that if you say that, well, the answer is God, that clearly doesn't solve the problem because the people who believe in God argue too. So it's like it seems to be an unnecessary step. But go ahead, Heather. Sorry.
Well, that's what I was meaning earlier when I said that it was actually when I broke from fundamentalism that I felt the freest to be able to living a good life was, because there were so many things. Sure, there's aspects.
Oh no.
Christianity that lend towards a moral compass. Hello.
You're in and out.
Oh yeah, you're in and out.
Okay. You guys are we back?
There you go. That's better.
You're back now, I think.
Okay. What was the last thing you guys heard?
Moral compass.
Yeah, Christianity's moral compass.
Moral compass. Okay. So that there was so much that even as a little kid, I remember, one of you guys mentioned something about how you had questions as a kid that you were too scared to ask. Same. That I remember even now, things will happen and I'll be like, wow, I remember that aspect.
You were saying that you were 5 or 6 years old and having thoughts running through your brain?
No, just things that I would hear from the pulpit of moral issues that even my little kid brain was just like, really? That's really like the killing of all the people, the genocides and things like that. So when I finally was able to break from fundamentalism, that was
Oh, we almost had it. We'll see if she comes back on here.
when I became free. No.
You said when you broke from fundamentalism, you felt like you finally became free. We just heard that part.
Okay, finally became free to be able to establish a moral, breaking from the religion to help me be able to establish and follow a moral compass for myself.
Yeah.
That made sense. That made sense.
Yeah, because ultimately we'll have to, in order for it to work. And to the question Trevor asked about, like, the Nuremberg trials and everything, well, not the answer, to address it, I guess, with morality, like, for me, here's how I try to look at morality, is that I think maturation is kind of an analog for how we view morality, and maturation in how much you care about other people. Because when you're a baby, you only care about you. You're a baby. Yeah. You don't know any better. Like, if you're hungry or if your diaper change, you just want attention. You don't care if it's 3 a.m. You were going to cry and your parents are going to come take care of you. That's what you're supposed to do as a baby. Then as you get older, you become a toddler, you're like, oh, hey, there are these other people and I don't want anything bad to happen to them. And you know how they always taught that kids are born evil because they lie without being taught? It's like, all right, true, but they also comfort you without being taught. They also care for animals without being taught. If anything, you could say they're good and bad. You can't possibly say they're just bad, because if the existence of like malicious intent is evidence they're all evil, then the malicious of love and care that they weren't taught also means they're all good. And so, but and then you get a little bit older, you go to school and you're like, okay, I have these friends and I care about them. I don't want anything to happen to them. Then you get older and older and you start caring about people in your community, people in your country, people in other countries, animals. And like, as you extend this circle of morality, that's how we view your maturation as a human being, which is I always reference this with conservatives because they always don't seem to give a fuck about anyone but themselves. And so it's like you're acting like a toddler right now. You never move past the toddler stage of what you care about. And if we're going to take on this project morality as a species, I think that if you have someone or a rogue society, well, honestly, let's be real, not that rogue. I mean, like, the Nazis were terrible and awful, obviously, but it was not the first genocide in human history. It's like not even at the time. There's still one going on right now. And so it was, I think that it is incumbent upon human beings to stop that as fellow members of, a rather advanced and intelligent mammalian species, that for our survival, we can't allow this to happen because anyone else could be next. I mean, then you start getting to the question about national sovereignty and stuff and where that fits in. That's actually where it trips up, because this idea of states and they get to make the rules for themselves that don't apply. I don't know. It is tricky, but I do think something like that is more than justified on the species scale, but getting a little complex on that and everything. All right, we're getting toward the end here, but I wanted to tell what I was talking about with the Holy Spirit thing. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys, either of you guys, last time, but these are one of the questions that I kept having whenever I was attending church and everything. The business meetings really confused me, because we would go to these business meetings and pastors would get up there and they say, okay, we have a proposal to buy this plot of land or to fix the plumbing or whatever, like whatever the church is deciding to do. And we need a vote on the church to move forward. So here is the plan. Here's the cost. Here's how long it'll take. And what I want you all to do is go home tonight and pray about it. And you already know I'm going with this. And next Wednesday we'll meet and we'll vote again. And they'd have the vote, and the vote would be like 60-40. And I was like, hold on. Like, everyone here is talking to the same Holy Spirit and like an all-knowing deity who knows exactly what's going on here. So you're telling me that 40% of this church is not right with God, or 60% of this church is not right with God? How is this happening? Like, how is this not near unanimous every time if we're all talking to the same guy? And that always bugged me. And I was amazed no one mentioned this, because I was like, how is this? Because it kept happening. I mean, every night, yeah, you'd have 100%. I was like, okay, that's probably what kept me. I was like, okay, 100%. All right, so we're good. All right, but like on the, there should never be any church splits. I don't know. And then how do you know which side is actually talking to God and which one isn't? I point this out too with I do political stuff all the time. You guys know it, but it's interesting that I talked to a friend of mine about politics. She was at Maranatha, the college too, and I mentioned that Black women had the highest church attendance of any demographic in the United States, like by far, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I was like, "Well, why is that?" She said, "Well, Black women like also are the highest votes for Democrats in the country." And she's like, "That's weird because the Bible, like the Democratic Party, goes completely against what the Bible says." I was like, "Well, it goes to your interpretation of it, right? Because I mean, you're saying." And then if you look at the split too between like Black Protestants and white Protestants overwhelming Republican, Black Protestants overwhelmingly Democrat. So someone's got to tell me here what's going on, because like I challenge anyone to point out the significant doctrinal differences between Black and white Protestants. Almost none. It's the same religion, the same Bible, the same God. Black Protestants learned it from white Protestants, hundreds of years ago when the whole being enslaved thing. So which group is not right with God? I love asking that question. Like which group? Because they do care about politics. Like we pretend church and state is separate. It's not. People, it's really tightly wound, entwined in American culture. So no one wants to answer this. Like, well, I don't want to say the answer was like, yeah, the Black people are wrong. God is there. Like the Black people are talking to God, and God's giving the wrong answer. That's what. Now, to be fair, Black Christians will say the same thing, but I don't know. I think it's more likely neither of them are talking to God. Like it actually just aligns with your socioeconomic interest and everything, and your religion is an expression of that, not the other way around. But I don't know. Just seeing stuff like that does make me laugh, because for like a group of people who are just deeply entrenched in politics and how it's very important to American life, and like either God doesn't care or you're not talking to him at all, like you're saying. Either way, I think I'm right. But we'll wrap this up here. Any final thoughts? We'll have Trevor first for this entire thing.
Well, just on that, I mean, there's a million denominations. There's a million different opinions, and it's just like evidence that this is not a unified thing that like we can just like, it's not so clear cut, right? Even within Christianity.
Agree.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is just that I mean I do think like Christianity, theology, like thinking about these sort of things can be helpful. I mean, we live in a Christian world, essentially, like a society, right? It's the dominant story, and so I still enjoy that aspect of it, for sure. But it's helpful to have a little perspective now as an adult, as 43 years old.
Stop it! This information needs to be suppressed. Heather, stop Trevor from mentioning how old we are. But your thoughts, Heather?
I'm proud of my years. I've earned every one of them. So pretty much, I don't know, Trevor just said it really well. It made me laugh though, TJ, how you said that one person was referring to trying to make a simple correlation between the Bible and a Democrat and the political party. It's just like, what?
I know, it's silly. That's what we were taught though, right? Like
well, and that's one of the things that we're talking about is you can't make it that simple. That whole passage of that God's not the author of confusion. Like, okay, I get what's being said there in the context of its historical reference, but at the same time, life is not simple.
Nope.
It's not simple, and there's grays everywhere. And I mentioned how even my dad, as being as absolute as he was towards the end of his, cut short too soon life, he finally started to come around and see that. even with his theological studies. And he was theologically studying all the time, every single day, self-study. And so, yeah, but it is, you know, these are our roots. This is our background. We can't completely break from it because it's kind of just ingrained in us. But I think it's important for each of us to be able to come. It's an everyday thing where you come to a belief yourself and you say, what is this doing for me and what's it doing for the people around me? And at the end of the day, you do what works for you as long as it's not causing any harm to other people. And that's one of the things that I really appreciated about getting on here um, for these 2 episodes is because it's actually helped me really stop and think about, okay, what is it? Where am I with my beliefs? So I appreciate that, TJ.
Oh, of course. I love having you guys. I just realized I never answered Trevor's question about what it takes to live a good life or what makes a good life outside of my sex and drug school answer.
I
But
was going to say, you did answer it.
I heard an answer. I don't know.
yeah, so but I have a real answer though. I have a real answer. And that answer is that the way I see it, life, this existence that we were all forced into and have no choice but to participate in, it is brutal, it is harsh, it is unforgiving, it is cruel, and in a relatively short period of time, we are all going to be dead. So, with that in mind, I think it is of vital importance that we do everything we can to make life as pleasant, as enjoyable, and as pain-free and as happy for as many people as we possibly can while we're here. That is kind of my philosophy on what it means to live a good life, a life that in my opinion, I would be proud to live. That whenever it's time to turn off the lights for TJ, it's like, you know what, I didn't always meet that goal, but I tried my best, and I didn't spend most of my years actively making life worse for people, and that's how I see it. That's my answer to that question there. Sorry I didn't get to that earlier.
No, that's awesome. Thank you.
And
yeah, that's good.
And I want to end real quick. We can cut this out if you don't appreciate it, Heather, or would rather not. But I wanted to just talk about you mentioned your dad just now, and your mom and your dad were fantastic human beings. And I was heartbroken when you told that story about the picture at the church. But I want to talk about your dad specifically because your dad was so kind to me. Your dad was so I was a terrible math student. I was so bad at it, and my dad was is a math genius, and so he did the whole thing. It was like, if Johnny had 5 apples, and everything I'm trying to get is like, you know how it is. And so my dad was no good trying to teach me how to do the math or anything. But Mr. Lewis would always take time out of his day to help me out with math, for no good reason. He's like, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to. And I would go over there all the time. I still sucked. I got better, but I was still bad, but not quite as bad as when I went there. And he was so funny. I like that sign that was in you guys' bathroom. And it had a sign over the toilet, and it said, "We aim to please. Would you aim to please?" Oh God, yes. So funny. I love that so much. And he always had these corny ass jokes he would be telling.
Yep.
And the way he insisted, me and Matt would give him so much grief over this, but the way he insisted on saying wash instead of wash, he would always do that. And I was like, Mr. Lewis, why do you keep adding an R to the word wash or whatever? But yeah, your dad was great. Just talking about now, I was thinking about all those times, Mr. Lewis, that he was fantastic.
Thanks. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
It's a random story, but we lived out, on where were we at the time? I guess, I don't, at the lake, we had a well, and your dad would come out to take our water out of the well. He loved it. He's like, it's got, lots of not
The minerals.
The minerals in the
lots of
water.
minerals
Oh,
in
okay.
it, yeah. So we had some
He was
moments
big
out
on that.
there. He'd stop by for some well
Oh,
water.
I didn't know that story. That's so cool. That's awesome.
This just came to mind. I don't know. Yeah,
My
I
dad
always
was
loved him.
he was
Man.
quirky. He
He
was
was.
quirky
He really
in some
was.
pretty great, interesting ways.
He really was.
A phenomenal beard too. Like that, something to
Oh
to
man,
remember.
he loved that beard so
Oh
much.
yeah. He didn't always have that, Trevor. I don't know if you remember when I was younger, he did not have that beard. I forgot actually. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I still think of him with no beard, but you're right. He had a pretty big, a cool beard. All right, we'll close with this. Well, all right, we'll catch you guys later. All right, if you guys don't mind sticking